day everyone. Today we'll be talking about booleans. Let's go ahead and create our new file. Our name is boolean.js. So you can go ahead and save that as boolean.js. Now before we talk about boolean, let's talk about data types. A data type is an attribute of data. We've actually been working with data types since we started. For example, we have declared var name is equal to David, for example. Now the data type for this is a string. We have declared name as a variable with a data type string. Now we've also declared something like var age is equal to 2. In this case, we have declared a variable named age with a data type that is a number. We've also declared var person and we set it equal to an object. In this case, we declared a variable person with a data type object. So now, in JavaScript, you can actually tell the type of data type it is by just using the type of keyword. So if you want to console.log, you can just console. You can console.log then you can just put in here type of. So if you put in type of name and you go ahead and run that, let's save that first. Then let's run our node boolean.js. So if we run that, we can see console.log type of name will give us a string. If we were to take off this name and check for the type of age, we'll go ahead and save that and run our node boolean.js again. We can see that the type of age is a number, and if we were to switch that also and put type of person, and we go ahead and run our node boolean.js once again, we can see that it's an object. So those are data types. There are a couple more, and what we are discussing today is boolean, and boolean is one of the data types. Now what is boolean? The boolean data type is a data type that has one of two possible values, true or false. So a boolean it takes the value true or false. Now how do you declare boolean variables in JavaScript? You just still go ahead, name your variable. Let's name a variable is valid, or let's say it's valid. Let's use is valid. Then to set it equal to one of those two possible value of a boolean, you just have to use either true. So you have set is valid equal to true this way without a string, because it's not a string, it's a boolean. So if you go ahead now and console.log is valid and you run this, you can see that it's true. Now it's different from if you put this in a string. It's different from if you put this in a string. You can see there is a difference in the way it displays. But today we are dealing with boolean, so let's leave it as a boolean value. Another thing you can do is, like I said, booleans have two possible values. The second possible value is false. So if you go ahead and save this and you run your node boolean.js, you can see that it displays false to the screen. Now let's use an if statement to do something. So now we can say, for example, if is valid is equal to false, we can go ahead and console.log and console.log it's not valid. We will go ahead and save that and we print this out to the screen. Currently is valid is equal to false, so we have told you that if the value of is valid is equal to false, then we should say is not valid. So we can go ahead and run that and we can see that it's not valid displays to the screen. And in the event, let's first run an else statement for if it's true. Now with else statement, it will just since there's only two possible outcomes, we don't need to do an else if, we just use an else statement. So we can just say, let's copy this and go ahead and say it's valid. So if we, okay, it's still false, let's leave it, we still get is not valid. But the moment we swap this and change the value to true, then we run this, we can see it's valid. Now let's do something. Let's normally, you know, in variable, if you declare a variable is valid is equal to true, you can come here and say var is valid is now equal to false. You can say that over here, and the value of is valid takes, sorry, you don't use the var keyword when you are assigning a value to a variable that already exists. So you just use is valid is equal to false at this stage. If you go ahead and run this, you can see it's not valid because is valid is now false, and we said if is valid is false, then you should say it's not valid. Now another thing we can do is, rather than having to always say is valid is equal to false, there is something called the not operator. So you can just go ahead and say, since is valid has only two possible values, which is true or false, and currently it's true, you can use the not operator to negate the value of the variable that is boolean. So if we go ahead and say is valid is equal to not is valid, so you use this exclamation mark to negate. So if it was true before, you can just say is valid is equal to not. This is the not operator, so you can just say not is valid. If you go ahead and, so now what this does is, currently is valid is equal to true. Now we are saying is valid is equal to not is valid. That means now is valid is equal to false. If you go ahead and run this, you should definitely see is valid as false and tell us that is not valid. So let's run this and make sure we are on the right path. So you can see it's not valid. If we go ahead and change this to false and we negate the value of is valid and make it true, then you can see it will tell us is valid. Let's go ahead and run that as well. So now you can see is valid. Now there are a lot of use cases for booleans, a whole lot of use cases for booleans. I think some if you are doing electronic programming, you would understand like how impactful, and you'll be able to visualize more the usefulness of these boolean values. I think you can use it to for a traffic light, for a light to turn an LED on or off. There are a whole lot of use case, but let's just do one more thing before we call it a day on booleans. So now let's create a function. Now let's our function what our function is going to do is our function is going to toggle a boolean. So let's say toggle boolean. Now our function will receive an argument which is the boolean value. Let's just say boolean, it receives boolean value. So now what do we want to do? We just want to, since a boolean has just two possible value, we just have to toggle whatever we get here. Now we can do that by using an if statement. We can just say if boolean value is equal to true, then boolean value is now equal to false. We can say something like this, and we can say else, which means if boolean value is equal to false, then we can just say boolean value is equal to true. So we'll go ahead and close that. Let's now go ahead and return the value of boolean var. So let's return boolean var over here. So now if we go ahead and call our function, we say toggle, let's just say, now this our function return either true or false. Let's store the value that our function returns into a variable. You can just say var result is equal to, now let's call the toggle boolean function, toggle boolean, then toggle boolean, let's just say true in this case. So now our results, we have declared a variable result and we have set it to toggle boolean, and the value of our boolean in this point is true. So we are toggling it, and that means we are changing the value. So our results now should be false, because that's what our function does. It just negates it. So if we go ahead and console.log results, and then we save that and we run it, we can see is false. So our toggle boolean function works. So now one thing, like I said, rather than using if statement, we can just use the negate operator, the not operator, to actually negate our boolean. So rather than all those plenty if statements, we can just say boolean var is equal to the not operator, then boolean var. We'll go ahead and save this, and we return our boolean var back, because now we have set it to the opposite of what was given. We will still go ahead and leave this as toggle boolean true. It's still supposed to negate it, and when we go ahead and run that, you see that it still gives us our answer. Now one thing we should do before we call it a day is, let's just console.log the string A is equal to B. If you go ahead and run this, you can see it gives you false. And you can also say A is equal to A, and you can see that since A is equal to A, it should give you true. Now let's declare another variable var is valid. Let's declare is valid variable back is equal to true, and let's use our type of operator to check if our variable is actually the data type of our variable. So if we just say console.log, then we use the type of, and we say type of is valid. You can see here that it tells us that the type of our data type for this is valid variable is a boolean. So we'll be doing a whole lot more things with boolean, and I think in the next 1 or 2 videos we'll be building a project with Node.js, an actual hands-on project, so we can implement all the knowledge that we have used so far. So thank you.